In 1942, a 23-year-old cryptographer sat in a basement office beneath a London bookshop, writing poems that would kill people. Not metaphorically, literally. Leo Marx knew that every verse he composed, every line an agent memorized to encrypt their radio messages from Nazi-occupied Europe, could be the difference between survival and a Gestapo torture cell. And he knew something else, something that kept him awake through endless nights. The Germans were breaking his codes. This is the story of the man who turned poetry into weapons and then spent the rest of his life haunted by the agents who never came home. When Leo Marx became chief cryptographer for the Special Operations Executive in 1942, Britain's spy agency was hemorrhaging agents faster than it could train them. SOE's mission was brutal and simple. Drop operatives behind enemy lines, organize resistance networks, blow up railways, assassinate collaborators. The average life expectancy of a radio operator in occupied France was 6 weeks. 6 weeks before the direction-finding trucks triangulated their position. 6 weeks before the knock on the door at midnight. The problem wasn't just the Gestapo. The problem was the codes themselves. British intelligence had been using poem code since World War I, a system elegant in its simplicity but catastrophic in its predictability. An agent would memorize a poem, usually something famous like The Charge of the Light Brigade or Shakespeare's sonnets. To encrypt a message, they'd use the letters of the poem as a key, substituting each letter of their message according to a predetermined pattern. Decode it. You needed to know the poem. Simple, portable, no code books to be captured. But Leo Marx understood what the old guard at SOE headquarters refused to accept. Famous poems were suicide. German cryptanalysts had libraries. They had patience. They had frequency analysis and pattern recognition. When an agent transmitted from Paris using Tennyson, the code breakers in Berlin just had to work backward through English literature until the pattern matched. It might take days. It might take weeks. But they would find it. And when they found it, they didn't just break one message. They broke every message that agent had ever sent. Past, present, future. The entire network unraveled from a single thread. Marx wasn't supposed to be there at all. He was the son of a bookshop owner, a skinny Jewish kid from Charing Cross Road with thick glasses and no formal training in cryptography. He'd learned codes the way other teenagers learned to pick locks, obsessively, compulsively, treating ciphers like puzzles that insulted his intelligence by being solvable. The establishment cryptographers, the Cambridge mathematicians, and career military officers looked at him like he was a clerk who'd wandered into the wrong office. He looked at their codes like they were death sentences written in iambic pentameter. The solution came to him with the brutal clarity of someone who understood the stakes. If famous poems were predictable, write new ones. Original poems. Poems that existed nowhere except in the mind of a single agent. One person, one poem, one unbreakable key. If the agent was captured, only their messages could be compromised. The network survived. The mission continued. So Leo Marx became a poet, not the romantic kind, the algorithmic kind. He wrote verses engineered for memorability, structure for encryption, designed to resist the pattern-seeking machinery of German frequency analysis. Each poem had to be exactly long enough to encode the longest possible message. Each had to avoid repeated phrases that could give cryptanalysts a foothold. Each had to be emotionally resonant enough that an agent facing death could recall it under pressure in the dark with direction-finding vans circling the block. He wrote at night, chain-smoking in his underground office while London slept under blackout curtains. He wrote love poems for agents who would die before they could love anyone. He wrote pastoral verses about England for operatives who would never see England again. He wrote memorial sonnets for people who were still alive, knowing some of them wouldn't be by the time the poems were used. One poem came to him after a woman he knew died in a plane crash. Her name was Ruth, and she'd been important to him in ways he never quite articulated, even to himself. The grief sat in his chest like a stone, and he transformed it into 5 short stanzas. Simple words, perfect for memorization, impossible to forget, The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have of the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. He gave it to Violette Szabo. She was 23, same age as him, a widow whose husband had died at El Alamein. SOE trained her to kill in close combat, to sabotage railway lines, to lie convincingly under interrogation. Marx trained her to encrypt messages using his poem, 5 words at a time, transposition keys derived from the letter positions. She memorized it in an afternoon. Flawless recall. She parachuted into France in April 1944, just before D-Day. Her mission: coordinate resistance fighters, relay intelligence about German troop movements, survive long enough to make a difference. She transmitted back to London using Marx's poem, message after message, her radio operator's fist, the distinctive rhythm of her Morse code, becoming familiar to the wireless operators in Baker Street who listened through static for her call sign. But Marx knew what they didn't. He knew his poem codes, brilliant as they were, had a fatal flaw. They could still be broken. Not easily, not quickly, but given enough messages, enough time, enough intercepted transmissions, a skilled cryptanalyst could find the patterns. Letter frequency doesn't lie. E appears more than Z in every language. Repeated words create repeated patterns. Mathematics doesn't care about poetry. The real solution existed. It was called a one-time pad, and it was theoretically unbreakable, not difficult to break. Actually, mathematically, provably impossible to break if used correctly. The concept was simple: a random key used only once. SOE could print them on silk, easy to hide, easy to destroy. Each agent would carry a silk handkerchief covered in random letter groups. Use each group once for one message, then tear it off and burn it. No pattern, no repetition, no mathematical foothold for the enemy. Marx pushed for it obsessively. He wrote memos. He cornered superior officers in hallways. He made himself insufferable at meetings, the young upstart telling decorated veterans that their systems were killing agents. The response was what you'd expect from a military bureaucracy in the middle of a war: resistance, skepticism, committee meetings, budgetary concerns, manufacturing delays, and the kind of institutional inertia that feels like malice but is really just a way to prestige a crushing urgency. Approval came slowly, too slowly. Silk one-time pads were manufactured in batches of hundreds when thousands were needed. Priority was given to the most critical missions. Everyone else got poem codes. Marx's poem codes. The beautiful, clever, inadequate poem codes. And agents kept disappearing. June 1944. Violette Szabo was stopped at a German roadblock near Salon-Latour. There was a firefight. She covered the escape of a resistance leader, holding off German soldiers with a Sten gun until her ammunition ran out. Captured. Interrogated at Gestapo headquarters in Limoges. The specifics of what happened to her there remain partially classified, but SOE files know enhanced interrogation techniques and refuse to provide operational intelligence despite considerable pressure. Considerable pressure. That's how the bureaucracy described what the Gestapo did to a 23-year-old woman in a basement cell. She was transported to Ravensbrück concentration camp in August. She was executed there in late January 1945, 3 months before the war ended, shot in the back of the head with 2 other female SOE agents. She was 23 years old. Back in London, Marx watched the radio silence and knew. You always knew. When an agent's scheduled transmission didn't come through, when the backup window passed empty, when the emergency protocol went unanswered, you knew. Sometimes the Gestapo would capture an agent and try to impersonate them, transmitting false information back to London. But Marx had built security checks into the encryption protocols, subtle deliberate mistakes that a real agent would include and an impersonator wouldn't know about. When those checks were present, the agent was free. When they were absent or wrong, the agent was compromised or dead. He kept a list. Names, dates, last known transmissions. He cross-referenced them with intelligence reports, prisoner interrogations, post-war testimonies. He became an obsessive archivist of failure, documenting every agent who went dark, trying to determine which ones might have been betrayed by his codes. The answer was never certain. Agents were captured for many reasons: bad luck, betrayal by informers, radio detection equipment, torture-induced confessions from other operatives. But Marx knew that some of them, an unknowable number, were caught because German cryptanalysts broke his poems. How many? 3? 12? 30? The archives don't say. Marx himself never knew for certain. That uncertainty became its own kind of torture. The mathematics of guilt don't resolve cleanly. If you create a code that's 90% secure and 10 agents use it, did you save 9 people or kill one? If bureaucratic delays in implementing better systems cost lives, who bears responsibility? The cryptographer who warned them? The administrators who moved slowly? The enemy who pulled the trigger? Marx carried all of it, the weight distributed across every name on his list. After the war, when the files were declassified and the medals were distributed, Violette Szabo received the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for gallantry. It was presented to her 4-year-old daughter. The citation praised her courage, endurance, and self-sacrifice of the highest possible order. Leo Marx received a standard government pension and returned to civilian life. No medals, no public recognition. The Official Secrets Act meant he couldn't talk about his work for decades. He went back to running his father's bookshop on Charing Cross Road, selling rare books to customers who had no idea what he'd done in the war. But he couldn't let it go. The faces followed him. Violette, the others, the ones who'd sat across from him in that basement office, memorizing poems he'd written, trusting him to keep them safe. He began writing obsessively, not poems this time, but screenplays and memoirs. He wanted their stories told. He wanted the world to know what they'd done, who they'd been, how they died. His screenplay about code breaking was rejected by multiple studios. Too technical. Too depressing. No happy ending. He rewrote it. Rejected again. Years passed. He kept writing. In 1958, a version of his story reached the screen as Carve Her Name with Pride, a film about Violette Szabo. It sanitized a horror, romanticized a sacrifice, turned her execution into a noble fade-out. Marx hated it, but at least people knew her name. He finally published his memoir in 1998, 53 years after the war ended. Between silk and cyanide, a codemaker's war laid out everything: the poem codes, the bureaucratic failures, the agents who died, his own complicity in a system he tried desperately to fix. The book's dedication was simple: to the agents who never came home. In interviews near the end of his life, Marx was asked whether he thought he'd done good work during the war. He paused, considering the question with the care of someone who'd spent decades interrogating his own culpability. "I did the best work I was capable of doing," he finally said. Whether it was good enough is a question for the people who aren't here to answer. He died in 2001 at the age of 80, surrounded by books in the same Charing Cross shop, where he'd learned to love puzzles. His obituaries called him a cryptographic pioneer and mentioned his innovative work with poem codes and one-time pads. Some noted his screenwriting career. Most mentioned Violette Szabo and The Life That I Have. What they didn't capture, what maybe couldn't be captured in newsprint, was the essential paradox of his legacy. Leo Marx created codes that saved hundreds of lives and created codes that may have cost dozens. He revolutionized field cryptography and watched bureaucracy delay implementation until people died. He turned poetry into weapons and then spent 55 years mourning the casualties of his art. He was a genius cryptographer who believed he'd failed, a successful code maker who measured success by the names on a list of the dead. The poem he wrote for Violette Szabo survived. It's carved on her memorial. Agents still quote it. "The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours." Beautiful words, originally designed as an encryption key, transformed by circumstance into an epitaph. If you find that beautiful and unbearable in equal measure, you're beginning to understand what Leo Marx carried for 55 years. The cryptographer who turned poetry into secrets, and then spent a lifetime turning secrets back into memory. He never forgave himself for the ones who didn't come home, but he made sure we'd never forget them.